With Black Clover chapters 370 and 371, the series is continuing to put its foot on the gas and drive towards the conclusion of the Lucius fight, but not without giving us more information and more memorable moments like Mereoleona busting out her transformation at the end and Fuegoleon showing up to provide backup. The only thing that this chapter or these two chapters didn't show us is what's going on with Leopold, which at that point that boy is clearly on a milk carton somewhere. But jokes aside though, there's a lot to unpack out of these two chapters, so let's go ahead and just dive right in. So we open up with the narrator telling us that the tables, they are finally turning because Asta and his friends are finally there on the battlefield. We see Asta leading the charge alongside Yuno as they're flying to the battlefield. Several of the Lucius clones are there to meet them. However, Lucius isn't one to be out of moves, even with the unwelcome addition of Asta showing up on the battlefield. And as he begins to start making the changes to the battlefield, we have chunks of the capital beginning to fly up between Lucius and his would-be attackers. This of course causes quite the commotion because he's affecting the royal palace as well, and we see everyone beginning to freak out, from the king to the orphans and other buildings, and everyone else is just shocked. Multiple battlefields are lifting up into the air. They're at a loss of words of what Lucius is doing by lifting up the chunks of the capital. However, it's Asta who's looking up at the sky, and he knows right away what it is that's going on. Ryuya had previously told him what to expect before Asta had left the land of the sun and come back to the Clover Kingdom, and he basically says that Lucius' plans, they're gonna be realized by using the compound magic from that huge throne room that he has high up in the sky. And that explains why a few chapters ago where we saw the real Lucius in his body so high up in the sky, separated from all the action down below. He was already moving a few steps ahead of everyone, preparing for what he believed might be a checkmate. And what's most interesting about this huge dome of magic that's encompassing the capital and lifting chunks into the sky is that at the very top there are roots that are belonging to a tree that can seemingly be traced all the way up to Lucius' location on his throne, and the tree itself almost reminds you of the Quilla tree that connected to the underworld. The religious imagery that we're seeing here is so dazzlingly beautiful that the people who see it, they realize that this might very well be the end of the world, but at least the end of the world has a certain level of beauty to it. And even real, someone who is fighting against one of the Lucius clones and is fighting against the very judgment day that Lucius is hoping to bring about, even he has to look at the sight before him and concede that he's seeing a true work of art before his eyes. Thematically, it made a lot of sense to have him be the one to give the biggest compliment to the artistic beauty of such an evil monstrosity, because it just goes in character for him to be able to see beauty even in the most dire straits and give the readers a different perspective of what it is that we're seeing before we shift to the more somber and serious reactions from William Vonjus and Charlotte, both of whom have suffered heavy battle damage, in particular Charlotte, but she's continuing to push through her injuries to try and stand in opposition to Lucius the Rogue Wizard King. We then shift back over to Asta and Yuno, and they've relit their battle spirit and they're pushing forward, trying to get even closer to Lucius, and declaring that they have to get Lucius' main body if they want to save the world. And we get the narration from Ryuya that declares Lucius knows that he was in trouble because there are two people before him who have the power to stop him, and those two people are obviously Asta and Yuno. However, if it were that easy, this wouldn't be a battle shonen and Lucius wouldn't be our final boss, or what appears to be our final boss. And he sees the attacks coming and he has his clones counterattack and send the duo flying backwards with a mighty attack, but unbeknownst to him, the Black Wolves, they've arrived at the scene. Most of them are cloaked in Asta's anti-magic upgrades, and they're continuing to provide the backup with Zora and Finral and Nero on one side leading the charge, Charmy in the background providing backup, and on the other side of the battlefield we have Vanessa and Gray, where they're attacking the Lucius clone that was coming up from behind on Noelle while she was locked in her own intense battle with her paladin mother Asir Silver. And I'm glad to see that Tabata took the time to show us that the Black Wolves, they weren't just all being concentrated in one area, but they were in several areas. And in particular, I love that we have Vanessa there with Noelle. Just given their long history between these two, having Noelle have her back covered by Vanessa, one of the very first Black Bulls, to try to make her feel at home while Noelle is battling her mother, the mother who, because she died, Noelle was blamed for her death for so long. And Noelle's mother in her own lifetime was already viewed as being a Wizard Queen level fighter and is now even stronger as a paladin. I love that we see the potential interaction between them and what those three being on the same battlefield represents. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, we have Ghost, who predictably is standing side by side with his sister in front of Real, because obviously sister complex powers trump everything. But what I find interesting here is that after the last chapter with Luck and Magna, where they took down the Lucius clone and how much they had to work hard in order to take him down, while the anti-magic amps that Asta gave them were pretty overpowered, these are not going to be easy battles for the Black Bulls who are staring down the Lucius clones. Elsewhere, the favorable lineups, they continue with Gordon showing up to provide Charlotte and Vange's backup, but most importantly, we see Yami getting support from his younger sister Ichika, and we see Noct that is providing backup. And what I love most here, and what I hope that we see, is that we get some closure from the Yami siblings and closure between Noct and Morgan eventually. Even Magna and Luck and Henry, they are on this scene, and from the looks of it, they're nearby with Asta, and they're cheering the duo of Asta and Yuno to head towards Lucius to ultimately strike him down. With just the arrival of the Black Bulls, you can see the final battles that are ahead. They look like they're beginning to wrap up or enter their final stages, and what I love about this is that with the Black Bull members who are using Asta's anti-magic for support, we're seeing Asta indirectly participate in each of the battles alongside his teammates without him actually needing to be there. And I think it's a very poetic callback to what happened at the first arc of Black Clover. Nobody wanted Asta except for Yami. Had Yami not been a Magic Knight captain, nobody would have given Asta the time of the day. Yet this black sheep, who is the one responsible for guiding the Clover Kingdom out the darkness that has been brought about by Lucius, and Asta literally has the Black Bulls, one of them, Charmy, as a black sheep. Tabata's in his bag here with the symbolism, because the boy nobody expected to be anything is the one saving the Clover Kingdom. But for crazy as this is, there's a lot more to dig into, because this next part of the story raises Mereoleona's character up even more, where you might not have been a fan of her before this, and if you are, I seriously want to know why. But there's no way you leave this next chapter not a huge fan of her character, especially when you factor in what her battle with the Wizard Queen did in the Black Clover movie, because when you do, it just builds on everything that we're about to unpack. So we have Mereoleona on the other battlefield, and she's watching as more of her comrades have fallen as she continues with her battle against Morris. And with this battle, we see Morris make the #1 mistake that most shonen villains do, which is just when they seem like they have certain victory at their fingertips, they start running their mouth, and it eventually bites them in the butt. So we have Morris, and he's mocking Mero by telling her, hey, look at all your comrades are now dead. And the narrative, at first it wants you to believe that he's about to back up what he's talking, because one of the spells he's using is Earth Magic, March of the Holy Fool spell, to summon forth dozens of dead bodies to serve as a shield. And Morris realizes that he's got Mero potential on the ropes, and even she knows that this is going to be difficult, because those bodies, they're regenerating at insane speeds regardless as to the magic that she's outputting on unleashing. And Morris continues to mock her by saying that she had to sacrifice the incompetent in order to achieve her goals. And while this is a brutal line, it further gives us insight into Morris's character and what Tabata is trying to show us about a side of humanity, which you guys have heard me say numerous times over and over. Every good writer answers the question of what does it mean to be human, and we're seeing one answer to that question from a very dark perspective. So humans, in the eyes of somebody like Morris, they view the people who talk about moral ethics, they eventually die and they get buried in the ground and they rot away into the nothingness, which is why they're ultimately better suited to be research materials for someone like him, because at least through his research, their lives, they can have meaning after death. And it's a fascinating bit of logic. It's a bit warped, but it's a twisted logic that has some truth depending on your perspective. So even in our own world, there are people who society, they'll tell you who their lives, they don't mean as much because, say, they're criminals of the worst kind, pedophiles, rapists, serial rapists, killers, people who, there are a lot of people who say society would be better without them. Yet there are some in the scientific community who will tell you that after those people are killed through whatever method, say you got lethal injection for the serial killer, those scientists will tell you, hey, they provided more value in death than they did alive, because the research that we're able to do by studying their brain and looking at their back history to figure out why and how they got to where they are. Morris is twisted in what he's saying here, especially to Mero, who has lost so many different people along the way on this day. But in a twisted way, he's right depending on your perspective. And we see that Morris would be one of those people who says it's okay to dissect the bodies of the dead, because he's literally doing it in a flashback with a mountain of corpses behind him. and he says it for years. His work, it didn't bear any fruit until one day it finally did, and of course it was because that happened to be the day he became a paladin and the second magic that he was given. And we see that the scientist who has crossed so many moral lines looking for the deeper answers about humanity and magic itself to satisfy his own insatiable thirst for knowledge was now very much proclaiming himself to be a god without actually saying those words exactly, but he comes very close. He walks right up to the line saying that he has the power to destroy everything and create life, and it just takes the crazy mad scientist trope and it drives it to extremes, which is what you should do when trying to prove a point, especially a point that's so beautiful for what we see with Mero, and all this is meant to set the table for that Mero reveal that we get later on. So for many years, decades, even longer than that, centuries, there's always been a debate on, does God really exist, and what's the meaning of life? What does it mean to have a soul? Does a soul truly exist? Mankind, as far back as the days of ancient Greece with the story of Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun, it's always pushed the limits out of curiosity that sometimes can end up fatal. In science fiction and fantasy stories, you oftentimes see a scientist or a villain. They play God. They dabble in things that are beyond human comprehension in the eyes of the greater universe. And Morris right now, he's walking that line, and he's about to be taught a lesson that when it comes to life, in particular the human spirit, there are just some things that they can't be learned through studying and observation and dissecting. They can only be learned by living and experiencing life itself, for all the goods and the bad that you get. Morris thinks that he's won this fight because Mero, she is finally falling apart. Her body is beginning to betray her. It's reaching her limits, and that's where we get the flashback of Mero, and she tells us the story of how she got where she is and her path to power. And as I read this part, it made me think back to the Wizard Queen that we got in the Black Clover movie. A woman who was so powerful that the cruelty of that power is that you can argue she was very lonely as a result of that power, that overwhelming force that she had, until she and Mereoleona battled in the movie, and Mereoleona's fists were able to reach her soul, which my video that will be in the end credits goes into deeper detail on her. In the other Wizard Kings, I bring that up to say that Mero, for a time, she was lonely as well too. There are people who didn't want to train with her because of her strength. She didn't even have a grimoire, and her power, it was already so high off the charts, and it was intimidating to so many different people. She tells us that she accepted that this was just gonna be her fate in life. This was her lot that she drew, that there is just nobody in this lifetime who could train with her, who could keep up with her, but she still had her thirst and her desire to gain power. And so she went to the harsh environments of the strong magic regions, and she fought monster after monster to test her power, to grow her strength and find the strongest version of herself. But eventually she hit a wall, because when seeking power, particularly in a battle shonen, you can only get so far before you hit that wall. People in a battle shonen, they fight harder and they grow stronger when they have something precious to protect. Oftentimes that something is an ideal, it's a dream, it's a lover, it's comrades. Even in our own life, there are just some jobs that will only promote someone who, say, has a wife and a kid, because they view that person as being more committed, because for them failure, it ain't an option. They have a family to provide for. They can't just walk away from the security of a job, and they have to fully commit because there are people who depend on them. Well, Mero isn't any different, and we see as her body begins to give out and she begins to start falling backwards, all these hands suddenly start reaching out in order to grab her and push her back forward. It was a brilliant touch to show that she was not alone even at her lowest moment right there. And those hands, they touch her. We begin to get another flashback. All of her subordinates are telling her that they want her to train them, and we see the effect that it had on her spirit. Before, there were people who turned away from her because of her power, but now these people, they're turning towards her. They're walking towards her specifically because of her power. Because whereas people in the past, they feared her power, were intimidated by it, she's now inspiring others to grow stronger. She's now a beacon of light that they are chasing after. And it makes those moments where we see her and she's talking to Noelle about her mother when they're bathing, and she's telling Noelle about how strong her mom was. We see the effect it had on Noelle. We see the way that she pushed Asta through their training at the volcanoes. It makes all those scenes hit that much harder in hindsight, because we can now see that these moments were moments that that she needed as much as them because of how much she went through in the past. Fuego eventually arrives with the fire spirit salamander, and we see the renewed fighting spirit of Mereoleona literally burning bright in her grimoire. It burst open and she begins to start passing her limits because there are cracks of fire. They're shooting up all out the ground. It's stunning Morris and Fuegoleon, and we see her ultimate flame magic being used, and suddenly there are all these bodies that are behind her. They're covered in flames. They're burning as brightly as hers, and we learn it's all the men who died from before. Now they're back to assist in the battle, and they're burning with fire, and the symbolism here is absolutely insane. In a lot of literature, fire is used to symbolize death and destruction, but it's also meant to symbolize life and rebirth, and scientifically there are even some trees that need fire to grow because without fire they stay stagnant. There are layers to this scene. With Black Clover using so much Norse mythology, you can look at some Norse stories and you can see fire at times has been associated with death and also resurrection in some cases. And what I love about this is that Mero tells those who are dead that, so what if you die? Did you really think I was going to let you get off this easy? And it's symbolic here because Mero pushed through her limits that Morris swore she had reached, and he's baffled by it because this isn't something that you learn by dissecting a human body. You can cut open a human body all that you want, but you can't see a soul. It's why some people even debate, does a soul even exist? Because you can't see a soul. But with Mero here, her soul is burning brightly as it is, and the dead are burning around her, and they're now back to life, and it's because of the stimulation that her body, her soul, her magic got through all the life experiences that she had to endure in order to get to this point. It's throwing Morris off as the counterattack begins, and we see a more passionate Mereoleona, and she's rushing to the battle with Morris, who thinks that it doesn't matter because he'll just cut her down like he did before, but he quickly finds out that Mereoleona's body, it is changed into pure mana, and it drives him crazy because logically speaking, she should not be able to do what she's doing, and yet she's doing just that, and she reveals to him what we just went over. Those who gave their lives for her, they weren't useless like Morris said. They weren't incompetent like Morris said. They were treasured comrades who helped shape her, in particular helped shape her soul, and it's another thing that Morris cannot comprehend because he spent so much time looking for answers that he never looked into what it truly means to be human, and what makes us human are our own shared experiences and how they shape us, which for Mereoleona, this is how her own soul has been shaped, and Morris is freaking out because she's overcoming his regeneration at a speed that he can't keep up with, and he deems it impossible because he was chosen by God, and yet Mero throws it back in his face saying that his death will be used to nourish her own human evolution, and it's again poetic. Some trees can only grow with fire, and one of those trees just happens to be Mereoleona, who appears to be striking the finishing blow on Morris. Out of the two chapters we got, 371, that's clearly the better written chapter, and it had the most payoff. That's not to say 370 was bad, it was just a setup chapter. The real meat of these two chapters is 371 by a wide margin, but I am curious to know you guys' thoughts on that.